everything that we have is modular. I mean, the new Prometheus system that we have will convert a standard 20-inch table to a 27-inch table with its own inclusive rail structure. Because people don't use, as we stated before, they don't use those bariatric extenders effectively, and they certainly never use them to widen the area in case someone has a gynoid shape, larger bottom when they're in lithotomy, because we worry about lateral clearance between the hand when the arms are tucked and where the stirrup is.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this First Case Vendor Spotlight, we speak with David Gomez, CRNA and CEO, CTO at Infinitus Medical Technologies. And we recently did a podcast with David talking about patient positioning and some of the risks related to falls and patient positioning and compartment syndrome based on some of the workarounds that are used in the industry, and how the technology has not necessarily, from David's perspective, kept up with the changing patient population as it relates to increasing BMIs across the United States. And so we're going to have a conversation today about what David has done from his clinical perspective and as an innovator with Infinitus Medical Technologies to help address those concerns in the industry. And David, as he will talk about during this interview, his military experience has really placed a focus on high reliability with the products that they're developing. So stay tuned. This is going to be a great episode and spotlighting some innovative technology in the industry around patient positioning. We're going to be right back with David Gomez, CRNA and CEO, CTO at Infinitus Medical Technologies.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is David Gomez, CEO and CTO at Infinitus Medical Technologies. And David, we recently had you on an episode of First Case, and now you're joining us for this vendor spotlight. And I'm excited because you've been doing some really great work and you've been innovating in the industry. And for our educational podcast, we talked a lot about falls and not only patient safety, but staff safety. And I'm just excited to be able to carry that conversation where we can really dive in and talk to you about the why of your product, how it works, and the value that you're bringing to the industry as somebody who has done the job, has lived it on the front lines, and designed something to really, improve the industry and make change. So welcome to the show once again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Justin, and all of your team there at First Case. Very excited to be here on this second podcast for that. And I hope everybody gets the value out of the first podcast from an educational perspective. And we kind of put these pieces together here for you.
Yeah, I think it's nice because we can take the conversation that we had, very generally speaking about the state of the industry with patient positioning, but now we can really put it into the context of your life's work here. And in that avenue, I know you gave us a little bit of your background, on the educational podcast, but I'd also like for you to tell us today about your background, but put it in the context of what led you to doing this work at Infinitus. Yeah.
So been a anesthesia CRNA provider for almost 18 years. And in all that time, sitting at the chair when we're providing anesthesia and managing the patient appropriately and doing what we're supposed to do, we still have a lot of time to sit there and observe everything that's happening throughout the perioperative experience. And when it comes to positioning patients, that's a really big thing for us because patient handling and positioning impact everyone in the room, whether it's time, whether it's, how far I need to intubate a patient or how I need to move a patient, how many staff has to be there, ergonomic safety as it relates to doing all that kind of stuff, shortcuts, workarounds that we typically employ. All that kind of culminated into ideas that we had to, start a company and push the envelope and design products that actually facilitated highly reliable behaviors so we can improve those things for everyone in the room, not just the patient, but also for the staff.
Yeah. And I think a really key focus of our prior interview was really just around the demographics in the industry and really, I'd say the demographics of patients in the United States and the obesity epidemic and the rising rates of obesity. And yet the technology has not necessarily adjusted to those changing demographics over the years. And especially around robotic surgeries and minimally invasive. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's limitations. So all surgical tables are the same. They're about 20 inches wide. And, we have bariatric extenders that we're supposed to put on there, but people rarely use them effectively. Also, when we look at the techniques of performing laparoscopic surgery, whether it's standard laparoscopy or using a robot, everybody has to get close to the surgical field, and we have more and more people on the team. So, when we think about obesity on the table, which is obviously 40% of adults in the United States per CDC, have a BMI greater than 30. And there's also an impact of providers, right? How many providers are standing by the bedside, how large they are. We used to have the arms out all the time, kind of in the crucifixion pose. But, when we look at the space in that arms adducted, so arms out, that space to operate in is very small, especially if you have, a couple of providers standing there next to the surgical field and a couple of providers seem to get bigger. So now we're tucking arms on patients that we routinely, 20 years ago when I started training, we're tucking arms on just about everybody now, when back in the day, we rarely did that. And you also have to look at all the infrastructure that's coming in next to the patient, whether it's the robot, the different types of robots that are out there. You got Da Vinci and they've got a large robot that has all the arms, but you also have some new emerging technologies out there of other robotic manufacturers hitting the market that have more singular arm systems out there that will be set up in and around and take more space around that area. So tucking the arms, becomes kind of a thing that we do all the time. And there's a lot of complexity and variance to that, as well as obviously securing the patient in a position that keeps them stable when we're subjecting them to, anywhere from 10 to 40, even sometimes 45 degrees of Trendelenburg or reverse Trendelenburg or lateral rotation.
Yeah. And you also described to me just how some of those workarounds can cause complications for the patient, not just falls, but I think you said compartment syndrome. Is that right?
Yeah. Let's talk arm induction. One of the things I talked about in the last podcast, the antiquated standards that we all still use with bed sheets, tape, gel, foam, towels, blankets, and plastic sleds, we still have to roll that patient back and forth to circumferentially wrap the arms and then use that patient's weight to secure them. When we try to protect the arms by using foam and gel, and there are drawbacks because while we want to protect the nerves and bony prominences, gel, for example, doesn't expand with third spacing of tissue. Third spacing happens for many reasons. These foot shifts can be due to anesthetics or gravity-dependent edema formations, say, for instance, to a dependent arm that's rotated downward when the table is rotated laterally. All of these are also duration-dependent. Vascular changes during anesthesia and fluid shifts can also be increase the risk for compartment syndrome and unforeseen IV infiltrations due to changes in both vascular and regional hydrostatic pressures. And foam, although we don't want to use memory foam on the other hand, will allow these tissue expansions to happen naturally. So the foam accommodates that. And if you think about memory foam, it doesn't provide too much rebound, but if you put a sled up against a piece of memory foam, that transmural pressure offloading that goes from the hard surface to the tissue can cause damage, which is why we use polyurethane foam. All of these arm induction processes can also reduce anesthesia access. When we look at single wing systems out there, for example, they're kind of like a sheet. They still rely on providers to roll and tuck that foam piece underneath the patient. And then if we add some plastic sleds to the mix, we have almost an impossible anesthesia access scenario. And, anesthesia always wants to preserve emergency access in case we need to manipulate IVs or restart arterial lines and the such. Sadly, because these current processes with our lack of accessibility, knowing that some of these surgeries will last for hours, we will start arterial lines on people. An invasive process, by the way, that can have its own risk and complications in people who don't necessarily need them. So when we look at all of these types of things, it's always challenging. All those processes really culminate into variances and workarounds. Another workaround that impacts anesthesia is that staff doesn't want to lift and move a patient with a draw sheet to lithotomy. So they look to me in turn to expect me to intubate my patients from 7 to 14 inches away on average. And, that's not good with larger patients due to the complexities of managing their airway and the rapid desaturations that can happen in that patient population. That's almost a no-go today. So in short, processes and workarounds do have a consequence for each person in the room. They do need improvements.
Yeah, and they also take time, right? And so the cost of an OR minute and just, it's directly related. The longer a patient's under anesthesia, there are consequences potentially for that, statistically speaking. And so, I can see where it's not even just about better technology. It's about a more efficient workflow in getting ready, to do the procedure and setting up. Is that also a positive of making some of the improvements? And I know we're going to talk more specifically about the technology in a moment, but was that another area that you saw as an opportunity to improve the process just in terms of shortening the amount of time to get ready for the case?
Absolutely. When we look at positioning that several of our clients have done, typical positioning for arm-inducted lithotomy required procedures will take anywhere from 5 to 25 minutes on average. And this is a lot of facilities do this. They keep those metrics. You can actually measure these metrics in your electronic health record between anesthesia induction to incision or anesthesia handoff to incision. But large BMI patients are going to be the longer times, right? Because we're going to need more staff in. We're going to need to do these types of things. So there is a consequence of time. People really get hung up on cost, and we can go a little bit about that later. But as we look at a higher payer mix going to, CMS bundled care, they're reducing those fees, right? You're going to get paid the same amount for those, which is usually a third of what private insurance is going to pay for. You're going to get paid the same amount, whether it takes you 2 minutes or 20 hours to do that procedure. So that time is really money, because the more time you waste, you are going to lose out on that ROI of that procedure. And so that's why, when we designed these things, we wanted to improve high reliability. We wanted our clients to position each of their patients the same way each and every time. So that way we can standardize arm induction. That way we can standardize ergonomics, and we're not making them lift patients or with sheets, and we're not making them take shortcuts that, try to keep themselves safe, but at the same time impact people like me trying to manage the patient's airway effectively. And that's why we designed the products that we did. And, all of our products actually were designed to actually work together. So that way you've got more high reliability as it relates to if you had to open and you needed a retractor. With our Kyber system, you can actually put it on, and we'll talk about our positioning in a moment. You can actually put it on without changing the patient's position, even if their arms are tucked or even if they're obese. And so today, we would have to untuck the arms. We'd have to move the patient over and expose the rail. You don't have to do that with any of our systems. So we designed those things so that everybody in the room, and this is from our military experience. We're a veteran-owned business, and 70% of us are all veterans in this group. And it's for us, it's about the mission. It's about high reliability. We have to achieve that mission success together as it relates to patient care. And our job is to give you the tools that you need to succeed in order to do that.
It sounded, what you were describing to me is almost modular in terms of very flexible to meet the specific needs and unique situation for each patient.
Yes, absolutely. Everything we have is completely modular. Our positioning systems move both patient and pad for procedures to facilitate lithotomy required Trendelenburg, surgical procedures, for example, something that we'll talk about in a few moments. But everything we do make is modular. Our Prometheus system, for example, would convert a standard 20-inch table to a 27-inch table with its own inclusive bed rail structure. As we stated before, people don't use bariatric extenders effectively, and they certainly never use them to widen them when stirrups or fixed post retraction is used. We as a company worry about that lateral clearance between the hand and the wrist in relation to stirrups or between the patient's body and fixed post retractors. Remember before, as we discussed in the previous podcast, you can pad and place all the padding you want between the patient and those fixed devices that are on the rail, but the sustained transmural pressure only has to be 32 millimeters of mercury or 0.6 pounds to start the ischemic process. So our Prometheus system allows providers to change the tops of certain surgical table models that they're currently using, so we can accommodate these larger patients. And again, its bed rail structure will hold several hundred pounds needed to support products like stirrups, and much more effectively than common bariatric extenders.
So, this is really a key point of the innovation that separates you from the competition, right? This is what is really changing the game. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you think about your approach to patient positioning that really separates you?
Well, yeah. Obviously the experience that, clinically from being in the room and, dealing and traveling around the country and watching what everybody does, because cultures are different. It's groupthink. A lot of facilities will do whatever they do, and a lot of facilities will be, well, this is the way we've always done it. You have to look at all of that from a perspective, as a designer, to design something that's going to essentially create that high reliability for them and to remove them from some of those groupthink opportunities that could cause injury, or there's some what we call normalization of deviance. And I lecture on that for anesthesia conferences as well. When we look at aerospace and NASA and all those types of things of how normalization of deviance and groupthink can actually poison a culture. So they'll do something all the time because they get away with it until all the right things align. And then you're going to end up having a catastrophic injury that was completely preventable. So we go into those things. And so when we design products that facilitate behaviors that help them do the same thing each and every time, whether that patient is thin or obese. And if they do that, then for them, it also reduces the ergonomic impact to them to keep them much safer, but at the same time, improving that reliability that keeps the patient safe and stable during these procedures.
Well, and confidence is so key in surgery. And I think that high reliability and decreasing variability always, I can expect this outcome. I can expect to be able to do this. That level of confidence is really invaluable for so many reasons. So let's start talking about the products that you have. We've alluded to it. We've been kind of talking about it. I feel like we've teased the audience quite a bit. Can you just kind of run down and really talk about the different offerings that you have at Infinitus?
Yeah. So when we first started several years ago, the first idea that I had was the Ion, and our Ion Arm Induction System is essentially, it's typically, if they want to tuck the arms and reinforce the arms, they shove these plastic sleds underneath a weighted mattress, and they're trying to push these things underneath the weighted mattress to try to secure and help hold those patients' arms. And that's after they've rolled the sheets and taped and all that kind of stuff, which never made sense. And, it's a hassle for me from an anesthesia perspective because I can't get access when I need it. So with the Ion is very different because it's not like a sled. What we do is we have a system that goes onto the bed rail. It uses standard bed rail clamps, and it has a knob that you open the knob, and what it does is it allows the system to rotate midline towards a patient. And what that does is it adjusts to the patient's individual profile. So if they're larger in its flattest position, it will actually add 10 to 11 inches to the table laterally so we can accommodate those larger patients. But it doesn't rely on circumferential wrapping. So I always have access to my IVs. I can actually, if they're supine, I can actually open the system and fold it down and start an arterial line or an IV or do whatever I need. And there's also a very interesting part of the design that when we tuck the arms, there's a cutout where the ulnar nerve is. So when I rotate the system towards midline, whether, they're moderately obese to obese, what it does is it actually raises the arms and puts them in the correct anatomic position, but the ulnar nerve is floating at all times, so there's never any pressure on the ulnar nerve.
All right, David, and I know you already talked a little bit about Prometheus, but tell us about Prometheus and Kyber.
Okay, so our Prometheus is our tabletop system that allows providers, again, instead of using bariatric extenders, that it can allow them, before we start our procedures, we all have a surgery schedule, and on that surgery schedule always has alerts. And, for me, if they're diabetic, then I'll need to run and go get drips and manage those. But we'll also know if our patients are large. So we can actually use the surgery schedule alerts to run in and go grab, say, for instance, our Prometheus system that will allow them to put these panels on top of the table to widen them up. So that way, when the patient gets there spatially, you're going to be able to accommodate them much better, especially if you're putting on fixation devices on the rails. So that way you don't have any pressure injuries. One of the new things that we're launching with the Prometheus is our Valkyrie system. And, one of the things about pressure management around the sacral area is when we're in lithotomy, the larger a patient is, they move them towards off the end of the table because they want to access the rectum and the perineum area. The problem with that is the larger they are, they herniate through that cutout and they collapse the insides of the mattresses that expose them to the underlying table, which can increase their risk for injury. So with our Prometheus system, we just launched the Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie, it's a plate that goes in that area to close it up, but it allows a surgeon to manipulate the exposure that they need, but provides constant offloading pressure to the sacrum.
So it's adjustable. That's really key.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about your flagship. Okay, Here we go. Get me excited about Hadron and Genesis.
So everyone uses some device for Trendelenburg, whether it's foam pads, gel pads, bean bags, shoulder systems. And we don't advise gel, as we discussed in the last podcast, because it's hydrophobic. If any moisture gets between the patient and the pad, it can become like a water slide and create slip differentials. Lots of people use all of these systems, but ultimately every one of those products have the same patient handling processes inherent to their use. I have to figure out where I want to put my patient, from an airway perspective. And then we got to figure out how many people it's going to take to lift and move that patient to a procedure, a position like lithotomy. As we stated earlier, surgical table designs are going to also impact the ergonomics and patient handling that we have to do. And as we discussed, Trump tables, for example, have a 45-inch midsection minus the headpiece. The average human sitting height from the top of the head to the sacrum is only about 34 to 36 inches. If you do the math, and based on several surveys, the average patient movements to lithotomy or reaches from anesthesia to manage that airway are both about 7 to 14 inches on average. Our Hadron and Genesis systems, for example, both utilize our patented foam pad lid platforms to eliminate all of these workarounds. They also provide much more stable pressure management, as we don't use memory foam, which only offloads pressure. It does not provide any impactful, low deflection that we need to kind of push that patient back up to keep them from bottoming out. So our Pneumophone is also very highly friction coefficient. It has a high friction coefficient. As we actually measure stiction, and stiction is the amount of force that it takes before any movement is actually seen on the pad. So we don't want that shearing injuries that come with that. We are the only company to do this. We don't want draw sheets. We don't want our staff providers to have to lift and move heavy patients with the draw sheets. And as we talked in the last episode, all current foam pads rely on staff to having to physically pick up the entire patient off their high friction pads with a draw sheet. And that's to keep them from bunching and ripping under the patient and the things that we don't want on those unreinforced pads. Our systems don't require any of this. We offer 100% pad to skin contact, needed for that maximum traction and efficacy. And so our Hadron was designed for arms out or abducted procedures, or for smaller BMI patients. And it does come with a draw sheet in case you want to use them for small BMI patients. Our Genesis Bi-Wing, on the other hand, uses the same Hadron FPLS platform, but has a very unique Bi-Wing arm induction utility. The Genesis, has an upper wing and a lower wing. So that's what makes this bi-wing. The lower wing can actually be adjusted to the patient's anatomy, and length, because you can move it down from the base pad. But in short, you just roll the bottom arms with the lower wing and then place the upper wing over the lower wing via hook and loop fasteners. The lower wing also has an inclusive pad, a foam pad that accommodates tissue expansions and third spacing, needed to reduce those incidences of compartment syndrome. It does not rely on the patient's weight to hold that tension either. The bi-wing standardizes arm induction process across a wide BMI spectrum and always allows ready access to anesthesia at all time. Again, these devices were meant to be placed close to anesthesia at the beginning, of the procedure if lithotomy is required, so we can effectively manage that airway. And then staff just readily tucks the arms without rolling patients back and forth, and then finally lifts and moves both pad and patient to lithotomy, and then locks it down to the bed rail.
David, just so much thought has gone into this. And sometimes, I know engineers, designers, or even just somebody who does a job every day might have an idea where they think, oh boy, I could really make this a lot better if we could just do X. But I know that when it actually starts going into development and production, all of those thoughts then get tested by what's actually doable, right? And so how much time, and I love the fact that this has been designed by an end user for the end user, but how much time in collaborating with engineers and everything else had to go into this to really get it to its advanced state today?
Yeah, we've been in business for 8 years. It's taken a little time. We're actually a very small and agile company, which is obviously a positive because we can vertically integrate. And, we have other big clients that are asking us to design stuff for them. But, we, as a company, we have our own engineers and regulatory processes in-house. So for us, I create and personally prototype all of our designs. My engineers then expand on the rough ideas to make them so much better. And I love those guys. We do our own materials testing in-house, all the testing that's required to make sure that our products are efficacious and safe when they hit the market, obviously. We also make 95% of our products in the U.S. and support rural manufacturing and jobs. And we will always make that a mission, as a business. Our Hadron and Genesis systems can actually lift up to lift and slide up to 500 pounds. And though we don't want people lifting and moving that much, our current systems do provide, a lot more benefit than current processes where, providers are doing these with a sheet. But interesting enough, you can go to our website now and get a sneak peek of a special project we've been working on for a very large organization in the U.S. And I think I told you in one of the last podcasts that this healthcare system told us they had 180,000 patients within their network that were between 300 and 1,500 pounds. So we're actually designing a new Infinity XL platform based on our Hadron and Genesis that will evolve the whole manual lifting process, manual lifting and move it to where it is mechanically lift capable. And we can hopefully remove about 90% of the ergonomic effort for providers moving forward. In order to do that, it takes the amazing technology of companies like SLD Technologies out of Portland, Oregon. They've designed a airlift and airframe system to get us where we knew we could go next. And I think, honestly, they're going to be the Apple of healthcare moving forward. But if you check out our quick video on our site, it's amazing. Our next systems will lift up to 1,500 pounds and come in different sizes needed to accommodate a wide variety of patients. So again, SLD's amazing airlift system actually moves around the ceiling all over the operating room. It's not just one fixed area, so we can actually move patients from the stretcher to the table and then intrastation movements on the surgical table. But again, from an engineering perspective, we're constantly evolving our products, to the infinity, to keep up with emerging technologies and platforms.
I'm assuming that that's where you came up with the name of the company, Infinitus. But that's really, just listening to where the future of this industry is going, as it relates to really that increased safety. Like you said, these systems can almost completely eliminate the risk for falls. Am I right?
They can, because again, we're doing the same thing each and every time. We're training behaviors. We're reducing variance. Our pads are reinforced, obviously. They don't stretch. They don't tear. They don't do any of those things that can create that. Again, we removed the draw sheet, so we have 100% pad to skin contact surface area. Sadly though, as much as we want to evolve this space, it doesn't always align with a hospital's financial outlook in terms of purchasing, because that's always a challenge, right? Because we talk about safety, patient safety, and we talk about patient safety, and despite states having safe patient handling laws, those things never come into play or are never considered when supply chain or purchasing directors start looking at our systems versus our competitors. Because again, as I alluded to earlier, all of those systems, they all do the same thing, but they all rely on the inherent manual lifting and workarounds and all of those things. And they're also take a lot of time. They may be cheap, but they take a lot of time. And so that sometimes they focus on the cost instead of the cost benefit, of the improvements that we've done. One of our newest clients is a robotic epicenter in the US. And, they were having a hard time getting our systems in because their GPO wanted them to go with 2 other systems that are competitors and they don't do what ours do. So they were forced to do a study, and they, like our other clients, realized that they had a 20 to 25 minute improvement in robotic dock time for each and every procedure without cutting any corners. So, again, we look at cost per minute. And I understand bundled care because I bill. I understand billing and how billing works from an anesthesia perspective. So you want to maximize that thing and train your nurses not to think about cost, but to think about improving their safety and not sacrifice themselves to meet somebody's cost threshold while they end up doing the heavy work. And that's why we try to educate our customers or would-be customers to help them navigate those challenges that they have with their supply chains.
Well, there definitely is an ROI when you're saving time and increasing safety. It's just not always easy to quantify. And I think that's one of the great things about seeing the addition of clinicians on these value analysis committees, because, we've really squeezed a lot of the line item savings out of the system. And so I think health systems, as they look at strategic sourcing opportunities, saving time and increasing patient safety, really has to start coming into that return on investment analysis. And I know, David, you've got several health systems that you've worked with that you could probably reference here, but they're all willing to give a testimonial on your behalf, or if somebody wants to reach out and talk about their experience with the systems and their experience with Infinitus as an organization, they can certainly follow up from this podcast and reach out to you. But I can really appreciate your perspective of, not throwing names around to accomplish getting across that you've had a lot of success with your systems. And so what I'd like you to do is just talk about some of those successes. And certainly if anybody is interested in getting any kind of a testimonial or a reference, they can reach out to you directly and talk to the end users of your products. But just tell us about some of the success stories that prospective customers would hear if they reached out to your current client base.
Absolutely. So I referenced one of those here earlier about the robotic epicenter that we reached out, and the robotic coordinator and even the surgeon would be happy to talk with anybody to do that, because, they had to determine, again, they were giving a commoditized choice, but our systems obviously evolved past that. So we did have that 20 to 25 minute improvement in surgical dock time for GYN related procedures for the robot. One of our other customers, actually a customer in my state, is one of our biggest customers in the state. And when we first went in, their positioning times, as I talked about earlier, were anywhere from 5 to 25 minutes. And our first generation, of the Hadron without that arm induction, before the bi-wing, we had combined our ion system with our first Hadron pad. And when we went in there, they were 5 to 25 minutes. We ended up knocking them down to 5 to 15 minutes. So almost half in high BMI patients. When we decided to create the Genesis as a system that's a complete disposable, we actually went back in there, and that time was knocked down to 3 minutes. So their positioning time across all BMI spectrums that they have there without cutting any corners was about 3 minutes. One of our other big accounts in the Midwest, a big university system, they had us come in after there was a Sentinel event. And actually, a lot of our customers will call us after a Sentinel event. Sadly, that's usually what it takes for people to act. And, a lot of places are reactive instead of proactive about a lot of these things, but we'll help them either way. But the hospital in the Midwest had a Sentinel event, and they were trying every system in the market. And we were number 8 to come in, and there was someone to come behind us. So we were there the first day, and we proved it. And they went ahead and did the one behind us a few days later, and the number 9. And they went ahead and went with us. So after 3 days of hanging out in the area and showing the system, they went with our system over all of our competitors because of the processes. Again, high reliability processes, same way each and every time, the ease of it, and obviously the performance of the product.
Yeah. And you solved their problem. Right? I mean, that's, correct. Again, we'd like to see these things happen proactively, but sometimes it does take a lesson learned and a full-on effort to say, how do we make sure that this never happens again? And that is a pretty big testimonial on its own, that they identified that your product was the one to really address the true nature of the issue.
Yeah. We try again, there's a lot of pads out there. There's a lot of commodities, but again, ours are completely different. When people walk by, they're like, oh, we have one of those. And then we always lift the wing up and they see the handles, and then they come over and then they start moving and positioning patients, or they'll get on the table, and we'll even subject some of them. Usually it shows we'll have a Trump table that will actually do 45 degrees, and we'll put them in 45 degrees, and they're amazed of how, and there's even
secure, right?
How secure they are. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And we don't have to worry about, we have an Azul system that they can use like a pillow that will help to reinforce those super large patients that will actually move with the Hadron and Genesis. And it allows the head to move naturally, as well as the shoulders to migrate all at once. So there's no disjointed movements between the head and shoulders that would create brachial plexus injuries. So we can use those in super high patients, but we have a very high reliability system. And a lot of people talk about setup times and all that kind of stuff. We literally can walk in. We always tell people, take the Genesis challenge, like the old Pepsi challenge. Have us come in, and we'll do a side-by-side of what you're currently doing and what you're currently using, and then we'll show you. And then we'll look at your metrics and your electronic health record to determine that cost savings for you.
I absolutely love the fact that you're really making the point by having an end user put themselves in literally the patient's position to understand, just how effective and how different it is. That's phenomenal. Okay. So how can people find you? How can they get more information? I know you've got this website, infinitusmedical.com. One of the things I love about your website are the videos and under the education and resources page. And I think that just really can help people if they go there and watch those videos, get an understanding and also learn something. And so I think there's a lot of value on the website there. I know they can follow you on LinkedIn by searching for Infinitus Medical Technologies, and Infinitus is spelled probably as you would think it would be, INFINITUS. But how do they reach you? You're a very dynamic individual, and you obviously, know your stuff. How do they reach you, David, to talk more?
So if anybody wants to reach me directly, you can reach me through my email, and that's d.gomez, Gomez, at Infinitus, Infinitus, medical.com. As you alluded to on our videos, we do a lot of videos. We actually, unlike our competitors, when you go to their websites and you see all these computer generated people on these machines, or on these products, we actually show you the process from start to finish. How a patient starts up here, how we tuck their arms, how we move them down, and how we secure them. And we even do them on patients who are 350 plus. So no one could ever say that there's some tomfoolery going. And, one of our latest videos, we actually shot overhead in real time here recently to show an entire process on a 6'4", 350-pound guy. So what you see is what you get with our systems. And that's why we want to be very transparent from a clinical perspective. But people can reach out to me anytime. They can reach out through the website as well, info@infinitusmedical.com. They can reach out to us, and, we can create, if people want to take the Genesis challenge, we'll send some samples out. We can actually do a virtual training session. We've actually been picking up a lot of customers during COVID because we can't go in. we actually sent, because everybody knows how to position, right? We're showing you how to do it easier. So we'll actually send you some samples for free, and we'll walk you through the process. If you feel comfortable, then you can trial if you'd like and do a self-trial. Or if you need me to come out or need any of my guys to come out, we'll do that. But we can pass on that cost savings directly to you by doing a virtual process. So reach out anytime.
I love the cost savings analysis. That's so critical, especially as we talk through some of the purchasing, implications and taking a look at a newer, more innovative technology. That's a big key in that process and making that case. So, David, you did a phenomenal job. This is the second interview we've done this week. So I want to thank you very much for your time and really leaping off, that conversation that we had about patient positioning and then really talking about your passion, because it comes across loud and clear for the products that you've developed and engineered. And I didn't realize, actually, I think till this call, just how deeply involved you are, not only in the concept, but the actual design and putting it together. So you are a jack of all trades, wearing many hats, and you should be commended. Keep driving it forward.
Well, thank you. Wait till next year. We were actually, AORN got canceled. We were supposed to, everybody always talks about when are the wireless things coming into the OR? And we were actually supposed to show our first generation that will eventually be a wireless IV pole. It's completely different looking IV pole, completely different electromechanical design. Eventually it will charge pumps on the pole directly through magnetic resonance. So, and it again looks completely different than anything you've ever seen, and it will last forever. So our next foray is going to be into technology and positioning. For us, we're a startup, or we were a startup, and that's where we did our hard work to get to where we are, and now we can start working on those technologies. So it'll be fun.
That was David Gomez, CRNA and CEO, CTO at Infinitus Medical Technologies. And I really have enjoyed getting to know David recently in both podcasts, but also had an opportunity to review his presentation that he does at many conferences around patient positioning, and really just looking at the statistics around falls and what that means for not only patient safety, but also staff safety. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me about the systems that they have, and obviously we talked about, many of them today, but it's that universal application, that modularity, that they're compatible, and the high reliability piece that will just give you confidence that your patient is positioned properly and safely for the procedure. And then obviously from David's perspective as a CRNA, just being able to do his job or your job as a CRNA more effectively. The product's being designed by the end user for the end user to save time and increase patient safety. I just want to encourage everybody, you can reach out to David Gomez by emailing d.gomez@infinitusmedical.com. He'll do that cost savings analysis for you, but keep up with them and their innovation by following them on LinkedIn. So just search for Infinitus Medical Technologies. And then finally, visit the website, because as David talked about, the educational resources are phenomenal, but they're real world videos. You can see it in action and put to the test. And so go to infinitusmedical.com and you can click on the education and resources tab at the top to watch a number of those. So being the owner of several startups myself, I love it when, a business really starts to take off and really put all that hard work out into practice in the industry. So again, have to congratulate David for all that hard work and effort. That's going to do it for this vendor spotlight on First Case. But as a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, as well as Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or just find us by searching for First Case on your favorite podcast application. We also have bonus content for many of our episodes, and you can access that by downloading our smartphone application for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback is important to the show. Thank you for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on First Case.